Wait a minute. There's so much happens, Sylvan, when you get to 93.
So this is going to be a bit of a different video. As you might have seen, I have still got one of my 4 grandparents, which is my nan. And at 93, she is still going strong. So I was on holiday in Suffolk not long ago, and I got the time, because I didn't have all of the kids, to sit down with her for 2 hours and just record her. It was a bit of an interview, and I think she enjoyed it, and I certainly did. The idea was to get her to tell her life story. Of course, you can't tell everything in 2 hours. A lot of stories, great stories. The idea, of course, is that my kids are going to see it one day. Most of the 2 hours will only be of interest to my family or to family and friends. There are some elements like how she met my granddad.
And I went to this dance, and my granddad asked me to dance, and he was with his friend.
How they built their life together after the war. How my father and my aunt grew up, how she saw us when we were kids. Some fun tidbits are there, for example, about living with an electronics engineer working for the state.
And I don't know what they did then. I know I had MI5 ringing me up saying if any Russian tried to contact me, I got to ring this number. Right. And not to say a word. As I said, if this Russian does ring me, I don't want to know what you're doing.
Some aspects I might have to explain to the kids. But how did you keep contact? How was it?
By letter.
By letter.
Yeah.
Within all those stories, there was a formative period of time.
I mean, we still had to get up and go to school. Yeah. Being in the area shelter, but after we were bombed, we were given a little house, and so we had our own shelter in the garden. But it wasn't very pleasant to go down there each night, and it was damp, and in those days we had outside toilets. You still had to get up and go to school and go to work.
She lived through the Second World War, and again, there was a lot to unpack there. There was, for example, how she stopped school early. For most of the war, you went to school then?
Yeah, till I was 14.
Till you were 14?
And I was 14 on the Easter, and on the Tuesday, I started work.
Everyday tidbits of life during the war.
Had to do things we really were above what we should have been done at that age.
How she worked at the factory or her role during bombings at this factory. Actually, this point is probably worth another video. There was also funny things about, meeting prisoners of war.
And the German prisoners of war would have spat on you. But the Italians, they looked like little boys who wanted their mothers, but we weren't allowed to have anything to do with them at all.
There was also a lot of sad little stories that are often forgotten during those grand history. We repeat ourselves.
But we used to have to go down there each night, and it smelled, and people were doing all sorts of things.
I guess the message here is war is always bad. And that's actually, with age, a good thing to remember.
We had clothing coupons. Everything was rationed. And if you think in those days when people are making a fuss about food now, if you were an adult, you got 1 egg a week. But if you were a child, you were able to have 2 eggs a week. And, that was the sort of balance. And everybody dug up gardens, and the parks were dug up to build, to dig for victory and produce food. And I think we could learn a lot now looking back, but would people still be prepared to do it? I suppose they would if they had to.
Especially today, and especially as Nan said it better.
It reminds me so much now of what's happening in Ukraine. Not that it was as bad as that, because it wasn't.
Of course, there is a movie somewhere in there, like most people could have a movie of their life, and I really believe a good scenarist and a good filmmaker could make a great movie of my grandparents' life. During the interview, one thing that struck me is how in life you just get lucky. I mean, Nan had a bomb explode in her garden and stayed outside doing hair raids during her first job.
No, we weren't hit, but there were bombs quite close.
And she's still there. And this video is essentially about one of those lucky escapes. During the war, I'm circling back, I'm sorry, Nan.
Yeah.
Did you go on holidays?
My parents' family were here in Suffolk, in Lowestoft. I can remember having a fortnight's holiday with my friend Peggy, who I'm saying sadly died last week. She was a year older than me exactly. Her life and mine were so side by side then, it was almost the same story. So Peggy and I shared some clothing coupons to buy this piece of material, blue and patterned, I can remember it now, and another friend of ours made us 2 dresses. So Peggy and I got permits to come into Lowestoft to see my family because minesweepers were based here.
A bit of background here. So Lowestoft was evacuated as it was on the shore. Only a handful of family with children actually stayed there. And by the way, and it's a plug, it made for a beautiful book by a Mr. Foreman, and I'll put the link into the bio. It's a great read. And really, you don't have to be from Lowestoft to enjoy it.
And we came to see my mother's mother, grandmother, who was ill, and it was really a hot day. And I had an Aunt Ellen, was one of my mother's sisters. She lived opposite my grandmother in South Lowestoft, which you know, Sylvan, in one of the little roads there.
The road Nan is talking about here is Stoning Street. It was a bit different at the time, as it went straight to Lowestoft's main road, and now it's a dead end. But it's still, perpendicular to the sea, and it's still nearly a straight line from Stoning Street across the Northern Sea, right to the German airfields at the time. So generally speaking, bombers could come, see the harbour, and fly right over Stoning Street and all the other streets which were along the harbour.
And I said to my mother on this particular day, "Can I go across and see Aunt Ellen?" She said, "Yeah, of course you can, but don't be long, because I'm getting lunch for us." And my grandmother was so ill, she had a bed under the stairs to keep her safe. Crossed the road, and as I crossed the road, an aeroplane, German plane, swooped up. I could see the pilot. I was the only one in the road, and he shot all along the roofs. Frightened the life out of me. And my poor Aunt Ellen came out and dragged me. She had what they called a Morrison shelter, which was a big table affair in the house, and pulled me under it. He could have shot me. He looked at me in the eye.
Yeah, so he was going very slowly then?
Yes.
And you saw him and he saw you?
Yeah, he just came up like that.
And he didn't shoot you? This story has been in the family for a long time, and after the story we went with my aunt to Stoning Street, and it was quite easy to figure the story out. The street looks quite close to what it must have looked like 50 years ago, 70 years ago, and the street was as empty as when Nan was crossing it. My aunt also had heard some other details for when her mother had told her the story prior to my interview, and so we figured that on this image Nan would have gone from the left side of the street and ran to the right side of the street, and that the airplane would have gone straight on. She would have seen eye to eye with the airplane, and that she would have ran back to the left while the airplane would have shot a bit further down the street. The plane would have come this way, and Nan was crossing the road. Pop somewhere here. Nan can't remember the make of the German plane. It was probably a Henkel. They had the range, the cupolas, which means that Nan would have seen the pilot, and they were quite used at the time, 1941 or 1942. They could also fly at quite low speed, and it's probable that they did see one another. This image here is a recreation of a FW-190 as recollected by people in 1943. This motion of coming up is actually quite coherent with the Germans' tactic coming to the shore, especially as by that point guns might have been already installed in Pakefield, just south of Lowestoft, which would have increased the need for the planes to fly quite low as they arrived near the shore and then veer back up once they pass the line of defense of Pakefield. After Nan told me the story, I actually went to Lowestoft's library, and then with my aunt we went to the Lowestoft Museum. Both are very interesting places, but I could not find the date, whether it was 1941 or 1942, as this incident might not even be of note enough to register. There is a blog that has gone through the record of a gentleman farmer just outside of Lowestoft who sent very exhaustive and precise reports. And frankly, even if you concentrate on the summer period, that does not allow to recoup the date really. Tunning Street alone was probably bombed multiple times. Around where my grandmother would have lived was bombed 3 times at least, and in one event in particular seems to have been major in 1941. There was a bomb that fell on it, which would have blown all the town, half the town down, but luckily it did not explode. It's all dumb luck. Some people did end up dying during those bombings, but it seems that generally speaking, the number of casualties were relatively low. Of course, the fact that Lowestoft was mostly empty must have counted for something. Lowestoft at that time might have been a bit of an entry point and a shooting range for the German pilots, because they would just, fly from Holland, cross the North Sea, and when they arrived to shore, see the harbour, which would have been like a beacon to them really, and adjusted their shot and their aim on Lowestoft, and then afterwards veering to their main target inland. There's a bomb map which is freely available, and it shows just how much the roads which are perpendicular to the shore, so straight line from the sea, got frequent bombings and shootings. The cranes and the harbour would also have been important for the Germans to get their bearings. On a lighter note, Lowestoft misery does not end there as being, a shooting range for the Germans, because the German intelligence does not give any strategic value to Lowestoft, only notes the harbour as of note, and describes Lowestoft as being south of Great Yarmouth. That sentence will hurt any Lowestoft lad, really.
Recently, I had a gardener work for me for a bit, and he moved into the same road from the north of England and took the house that also had an empty shop next to it, so it was convenient for him for his business. And he came to me one day, he said, "Do you know what? I've tried to install a wood burning fire, but I'm having terrible trouble with draft and smoke." He said, "I went up into the loft and there's all little holes." So I said,
Oh, you know where that comes from.
yeah. And recent years, Auntie Jill and I went to the museum on the seafront, and there was a man there about my age at the time, a few years ago, and he was talking about this, and I said to him, he wasn't talking about that particularly, about how the planes used to come up, and I said, "Excuse me butting into your conversation, but this was my experience," which I told him about. So he said, "Do you know," he said, "I'm glad to have met you." He said, "Because I lived in that road, and I'm obviously younger than you. And I thought it was my imagination. I said it wasn't, it's true.
So that's it. That's the story. Nan would not speculate much on why she did not get gunned down. It might have been luck. It might have been that the pilot missed, or quite simply that he missed her on purpose because he just didn't want to shoot her down. When I was younger, Nan insisted that it was because he decided not to gun her down. Who knows? And that's probably the best way to think about it. I want to leave you with just one point. If you still have relatives of a certain age, don't hesitate to do the same. It's a very nice moment to spend with them. And a lot of things to learn, because there is this story and there are other stories, but the best memories and those that Nan spent the most time on were of course those of friends and families. Yeah, because we don't have the end of the story. When you went on holiday with Peggy and you bought this meter of this length of clothes,
Yes.
clothes, so you had someone to make a suit out of it, right?
A friend of ours just made a summer dress each, cut it out and machined it up, and we thought we were the bee's knees, and we were both dressed identically. She was beautiful with long hair and beautiful eyes.
And on that, see you next time.